All right. Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to the chill stream. Just a FYI, heads up. This is welcome to Cozy Clairvoyance. If it just so happens to be your first time here, welcome, and welcome back if it's not. I appreciate you either way. This is a chill stream though, not a reading stream. Just put that disclaimer out there right now. Can you guys see the screen I'm sharing? Just let me know. Let me know. Okay, hold on. Beryl and Lefty are you two still having a lover's quarrel? What's the R word? I thought it was run. Apparently not. Oh, clumsy, my meds are kicking my ass. If you can't stay up, that's okay, Vicky. I appreciate you trying to. You're lovey. You can always catch the replay. Go to sleep. Don't fight it. Don't you fight. Oh, it's raid. Oopsie daisies. How was I to know? Okay, good. It's sharing. All right. Hey, Clumsy. I wasn't ready. Sorry. Okay. Buffa Cat, welcome back. With this chill stream by closure about Jack, the monkey that went on a trip to the Arctic. That was last week, right? Keeping our fingers crossed, but this is gonna be such a good one. Okay, so the share screen is working. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna drop Scary Interesting's link in the chat real quick. This is who the first video is from. We have two tonight, okay? That's Scary Interesting. That's who we're watching right now. Sub up to him. He's got a lot of good content. So I'm gonna make this bigger. Make bigger. Tell me if you can hear it. Make me smaller. Hold on. All right. Now tell me if you guys can hear it. Okay. Just give me a thumbs up if the volume's okay. I'm so excited for this one. Hold on.
In 1964, a man was attending a sports show in Chicago, and
he changed the title of this too. The title was different a few days ago. Let me know if y'all can hear it though. Okay. I'm so excited for this one. This one looks so good. So good. Just kidding, getting me back looking forward to what you've got cleaned up. Right? I know. This should be a good one tonight. This story in particular, I've seriously been on pins and needles for. Okay, thumbs up. All right, so we're good. All right. Yay. I'm so excited. Are you guys excited? I'm so excited. Okay. I'm going to shut up now.
In 1964, a man was attending a sports show in Chicago, and he'd been wandering around the different booths when he decided to head over to the archery stand across the hall. Just before he got to the display, he froze in shock and fear. Stood before him was the ghost of his neighbor who drowned nearly 8 years earlier. This is the story of Lawrence Joseph Bader. Sometime between May 18th and 20th, 1957, a guy walked into the Old Round Table Bar in Omaha. The bartender on duty at the time remembered him as handsome and stocky with a thin pencil mustache and an outgoing personality. He was wearing slacks and a sport jacket while carrying a Navy-issued bag on his shoulder and a small suitcase in one hand. In his other hand, he held a guide to bartending. According to the bartender, the man was debonair, well-dressed, and not broke. Then, in a thick Boston accent, the man asked two things. First, he asked if there was any work available, and second, did she, meaning the bartender, want to go out for dinner? The man's name was John Francis Johnson, but soon enough, everyone would come to know him as Fritz. The bartender then told him there might be an opening at Ross's Steakhouse, so he headed there. Then at the steakhouse, the Navy after 13 years because he hurt his back. Now he was taking time traveling the country and he'd found a room at the Farnham Hotel near the bus station and wanted to stay in Omaha for a while. He told the owner he'd gotten experience bartending in service bars and pulled out a Navy driver's license to prove who he was. Fritz was extremely charismatic, and shortly after starting work at the steakhouse, people came to the restaurant to hear tales of his brutal and unusual childhood in Boston. He told them about how he was an orphan and how he was found on a doorstep in Boston and that he was one of 22 kids who were all given the name John Johnson. He got the nickname Fritz either at the orphanage after a character in the famous 1930s comic strip Katzenjammer Kids, or in the Navy because of a short haircut that made him look German. Which story he gave you depended on when you asked. People also like to hear about his time in the Navy and how he joined at 17 and fought in both World War II and the Korean War before picking up a back injury when he was blown off a destroyer during a submarine attack. And because he was so extroverted and flamboyant, Fritz became well known and well loved. People were drawn to him because he was so strange. Like, for example, when people came to one of his frequent champagne parties, they found out that there was no furniture in his apartment. There was just a collection of old pillows and a single fish tank containing Siamese fighting fish, which are a kind of tropical.
Okay. Real quick, no furniture, just pillows and fish. Okay. That does not like a red flag for anyone else.
Because he was so strange. Like, for example, when people came to one of his frequent champagne parties, they found out that there was no furniture in his apartment. There was just a collection of old pillows and a single fish tank containing Siamese fighting fish, which are a kind of tropical fish that like to fight to the death, the winner eating the loser. He was also known as something of a flirt and brought many young women either back to his cushion-filled home or to his old hearse, known as the hunting vehicle, that he'd equipped with more cushions, a bar, and a Buddha-shaped incense burner. Weirdly as well, he only ever signed his name as Fritz, almost shunning his last name as if it disgusted him, and he only ever dated checks by season with spring, summer, fall, rather than the date. He was so well known for this strange behavior that a teller at the bank was even given the job of calling Fritz to remind him when the season was changing. He also never seemed unhappy, which might have been because he just flat out ignored bad news. He didn't watch TV news or read newspapers and avoided anything that could bring him down. In fact, the only time anyone ever saw him sad was when he was trying to help his friends out and couldn't find a way. Fritz was also known in the area for his charity stunts, and the most famous of these was when he decided to help Omaha's polio drive by spending more than 15 days in a box strapped to the top of a 50-foot flagpole. The only things he ate or drank during this whole period were the martinis his friends would send up to him twice daily. When it was time to come down, the crowd watched as the thin, bearded Fritz descended to the ground. Upon touching the ground, he walked straight over on shaky legs to a convertible filled with glamorous models. They then wrapped their arms around him as the car drove down the street in a celebration parade. Due to his charisma and flamboyance, it didn't take long for him to move from bartending to becoming the DJ of a radio station. He started by visiting the local station KBON to use the equipment to practice when they weren't broadcasting, and in 1959, the station realized he had a talent. They hired him as a DJ, and this took him from a restaurant curiosity to a local celebrity. In 1961, he even transitioned to being on camera, becoming sports director and announcer at KETV, which is a local cable TV station. Fritz also didn't like the idea of marriage and would often tell his friends who were getting married that they were fools. But then in 1961, he met and married a 20-year-old photography model named Nancy Zimmer, even adopting her daughter from a previous marriage at the same time. The friends he'd called fools would joke with him about it, but he didn't mind because he was happy. In 1964, a cancerous tumor was found behind Fritz's left eye, and in the surgery to remove it, he lost the eye, spending the rest of his...
Wait, what, Jiraiya? What are you confused about? You want me to back it up a tiny bit? Did you miss something? He is an alien, Elizabeth. Confirmed. I knew it. Hold on, I'm going to back it up a tiny bit for Jiraiya. Just like a few seconds. Jiraiya's like, what? Wait, what? Back up just a tiny. Just a teeny.
Station. He started by visiting the local station KBON to use the equipment to practice when they weren't broadcasting, and in 1959, the station realized he had a talent. They hired him as a DJ, and this took him from a restaurant curiosity to a local celebrity. In 1961, he even transitioned to being on camera, becoming sports director and announcer at KETV, which is a local cable TV station. Fritz also didn't like the idea of marriage and would often tell his friends who were getting married that they were fools. But then in 1961, he met and married a 20-year-old photography model named Nancy Zimmer, even adopting her daughter from a previous marriage at the same time. The friends he'd called fools would joke with him about it, but he didn't mind because he was happy. In 1964, a cancerous tumor was found behind Fritz's left eye, and in the surgery to remove it, he lost the eye, spending the rest of his life wearing an eye patch. But the new look only made him even more charismatic and recognizable. He was still as happy as ever, and in fact, he'd never been so happy in all his life. Fritz was also a keen archer.
because
He
eye
claimed to have
patches
found
are
the
kind
sport
of
when looking
hot.
for ways to help strengthen his bad back, and was a real natural. Soon, he was competing at the state level and became the Nebraska archery champion. Later, the Sanders Archery Company even approached him to represent them at sporting goods shows, and despite his eye loss, he was thrilled to have a chance to travel around, demonstrating his hobby for a little extra money. In February of 1965, Sanders sent him to a show at McCormick Place, which is a convention center in Chicago. He spent the day, as he always did, demonstrating the types of equipment on offer to curious customers, helping to get new people excited to try the sport, while selling advanced bows and other paraphernalia to other people who already enjoyed it. As the morning drew on, he spotted a man staring at him, and the look on his face was odd. It was like he'd seen a ghost. He had no idea who the man was or what he wanted, so he kept doing his job and tried to ignore him. Later that afternoon, the man returned, this time with a woman. When the couple saw Fritz, both seemed to be in shock. Fritz thought that maybe they were archery fans trying to build up the nerve to say hello to the Nebraska champion. But then, after a moment's pause, one of the women walked up to Fritz and spoke to him. What she said changed his life forever. The woman said, "Pardon me, but aren't you my uncle, Larry Bader, who disappeared 7 years ago?" Lawrence Joseph Bader, known as Larry, was born on December 2nd, 1926 in Akron, Ohio. His father, Dr. Stephen Bader, was one of Ohio's leading dentists, and the family was well known in the community. He was one of 3 brothers and a sister, and his upbringing was, in some ways, strictly Catholic. In other ways, his father spoiled and encouraged them to have as much fun as possible. He wanted his kids to have the best lives they could and to be extroverted and confident. Larry, like Fritz, dropped out of school to join the Navy in his late teens and served during the Second World War. After 2 years of service, Larry managed to get his high school diploma by studying while in the forces, and he decided to leave the Navy to enroll at the University of Akron. In doing this, he realized he wasn't the academic type and only stayed at the university long enough to meet his wife, Mary Lou Knapp, who he married on April 19, 1952. Larry was always the happy-go-lucky type, looking for the next get-rich-quick scheme and unable to focus on one thing at a time. Part of the reason he left university early was that he spent so much time running a small hamburger stall across the campus that he had no time for his studies. Later, Larry and Mary raised 3 children in the West Hill neighborhood of Akron, and he was known for being a typical man's man and the outdoor type who kept to himself. When he was hunting, he even wore a genuine buckskin, and he had once won a tri-state archery contest. At the same time, he was also a family man and a beer-drinking guy who could talk your ear off. He also sometimes pulled off crazy stunts to make his friends laugh, like eating a whole chicken, bones and all. But he certainly wasn't extravagant the way Fritz was. One of his old friends even said that if Larry had behaved like Fritz had, they probably would never have spoken to him. After marrying and having kids, though, Larry stopped chasing get-rich-quick schemes. He settled down to something of a career as a cookware salesman working for the company Fritz Zept at Lifetime Distributors. Unfortunately, being raised by a rich dad who gave him more cash whenever he wanted, he never really appreciated the value of money. One of his neighbors even described him as a high liver and a swinger, but obligations made it difficult for him to live the life he wanted. In the 1950s, a $17,000 mortgage, nearly $200,000 today, and the cost of raising 3 kids weighed heavily on his $10,000 yearly income. What made things worse was that he owed taxes to the IRS, so he was a further $20,000 in the red. Because of this, he worried about what those debts might do to his family if anything were to happen to him. So he took out a life insurance policy and boosted his accidental death clause so if that something happened, his wife and kids would be taken care of. At midday on May 15, 1957, Larry packed a small suitcase and fishing gear into the back of his Pontiac. His wife didn't like the idea of him fishing after work, and she told him she wished he'd just come straight home. She was pregnant with their 4th child and didn't like hanging around the house without him, but Larry just shrugged, turned to his wife and said, "Maybe I will, maybe I won't." Then he put on his jacket and drove up to Cleveland to resolve some bad checks that customers had given him. After he sorted those issues out, he paid some outstanding bills, including his latest life insurance premium, and cashed a check for $400. He decided he would go fishing after all and drove toward Lake Erie. After a long day of sales and debt chasing, he wanted to relax and clear his head. Soon enough, he reached the banks of the Rocky River and pulled up next to a spot called Eddie's Boathouse, where the river meets Lake Erie. He then took his fishing gear and suitcase out of the car and headed for the store, and after looking around for a bit, Larry found a 14-foot boat to rent and asked the owner if he could install a set of lights. The owner thought this was strange because Larry also promised the owner he'd be back before dark, but he set up the lights anyway. During this time, the cloud cover was also getting a little heavier, and the renter told Larry that it wasn't such a good idea to be out fishing that day. Storm warnings had been posted, and boating in the lake during a storm could be difficult in the daytime. If he got caught out in the dark, it could be lethal. But Larry was insistent. He really wanted to go fishing and was confident he could handle it. He pulled out the roll of $400 he had, laid the $15 deposit in front of the owner, climbed aboard, started the motor, and then cruised off down the river into the lake. Just as the sun was setting, the Coast Guard spotted Larry in his boat and came over to warn him about the increasing wind. Larry told him not to worry and that he'd experienced those conditions before and then waved them away. As you might have expected, 3 hours later, a violent storm rolled in and battered Lake Erie. The owner feared the worst when Larry didn't return before dark as promised, and he contacted the authorities.
Sig, why did you cheat? Arr, arr, arr. Why did you cheat? Dang it. Okay, don't spoil it for the rest of us.
The following day, the police came over to warn him about the increasing wind. Larry told him not to worry and that he'd experienced those conditions before and then waved them away. As you might have expected, 3 hours later, a violent storm rolled in and battered Lake Erie. The owner feared the worst when Larry didn't return before dark as promised, and he contacted the authorities. The following day, the police and Coast Guard began a search, and it didn't take them long to find the boat. It was wedged 5 miles down the shore on a beach in surprisingly better shape than expected. In the boat was all of the gear that Larry had taken out with him, as well as 2 life jackets and one of the 2 oars the boat's owner had provided. The only things missing were a small suitcase and Larry himself. The police investigation also noticed that the damage wasn't enough to have caused any real problems, and that there was no sign that the boat had capsized. If the boat had turned over or Larry had fallen out at some point, he would have almost certainly died. The water was way too rough for anyone to survive. Another thing they noticed was that the fuel line to the boat's engine had become disconnected, something that doesn't usually happen by itself. Still, they kept searching for Larry for another 2 months before assuming he must have gone overboard and drowned. 3 years later, in 1960, he was officially declared legally dead. That was until 8 years later when a neighbor spotted Larry at the sports convention. Except, Larry was insisting that his name was Fritz, and he had no idea who Larry was. The man Fritz had noticed staring at him that morning was a neighbor of Larry's from Akron, Ohio. Despite Fritz's black eye patch and pencil-thin mustache, the man couldn't shake the idea that he looked just like the son of their dentist, Dr. Bader. But it couldn't be him because he had died 8 years earlier. Then, unable to shake the resemblance, the man found a payphone and called John Bader, the missing man's brother. John then got a hold of his cousin, Suzanne, who lived nearby, and asked her to check it out. And as soon as Suzanne got to the sports show, she took one look at Fritz and couldn't believe it. It had to be him. Even though he had changed so much, the way he behaved, the eye patch, the mustache, she knew it was him. That's when she walked over and asked him if he was Larry. Right away, Larry acted like it must be some sort of joke, laughing off the idea and swearing he had no idea who Suzanne was or the neighbor was. But Suzanne was certain. She asked Fritz if he'd speak to John over the phone, and Fritz was actually happy to do that. He was sure a quick conversation with John would settle it, and a case of mistaken identity would be solved. But when Fritz spoke to John, John knew the voice. It was Larry. He was sure of it. Fritz then agreed to meet John and his older brother Rich, and they chartered a private jet to fly up to Chicago to confront Fritz. Once they finally met up, though, both brothers were sure who they were speaking to. Fritz, on the other hand, continued to deny it and claimed he had no idea what they were talking about and insisted that he was not Larry Bader. He must just look and sound like him, and it was true that the two personalities didn't seem to match. There was Fritz, who was a flamboyant, well-dressed, larger-than-life local celebrity, while Larry was a man's man who was much more dignified and introverted and who liked nothing more than to go fishing alone with his thoughts. But John and Rich remembered the young Larry, the outgoing Larry, the Larry who acted a lot like Fritz. So the brothers asked if he'd be willing to prove who he was by checking his fingerprints against the prints on Larry's naval record. Again, Fritz was actually happy to do this and accompanied the brothers down to the police station to have his identity confirmed. They took his prints and sent them off to the FBI, and it would take a day for the results to come back. The next day, Fritz was working his job at the TV station when he got a call from the police. He and Larry's fingerprints were identical. They told him they were either the same person or this was something from outer space or beyond. Upon hearing this, Fritz claimed that he was in physical shock. He had no doubt that he was not Larry Bader, and at the same time, it was like having a door slammed in his face. He couldn't remember who he was, and what he could remember apparently wasn't real. But it wasn't just Fritz whose world had been turned upside down. He now had 2 wives. His first wife, Mary Lou, had to face the shock of finding out her deceased husband was alive just as her grief had subsided enough for her to accept a proposal from another man. At the time, she talked about feeling the same emptiness she'd experienced re-drowned all over again, and she reportedly became consumed with the numbness. She was also Catholic and wouldn't divorce Larry, and she felt like she had to end the relationship with her fiancé. This also meant that Fritz's marriage to his second wife was null and void. And it wasn't just the emotional turmoil that Mary Lou was facing. She'd received $254 in Social Security every month since Larry was declared dead. She'd also been given $39,500 in life insurance, and her mortgage had been paid off. They all wanted that money back with interest, as did the IRS, which Larry still owed taxes. While all of this was happening, Fritz didn't hide from anything though. He started sending part of his wages to Mary Lou, but that became difficult when his life began to unravel. He was fired from his job at the TV station, and despite promising to stick by him, it all became too much for Nancy. She asked him to move out, so Fritz moved into a room at the YMCA and began bartending again, with 2 sets of kids to support on a tiny salary of $100 a week. $50 went to Mary Lou, and $20 went to Nancy. People at the time, understandably, wondered if Fritz, or rather Larry, was a fraudster and a bigamist, and charges were considered, but Fritz insisted that he didn't remember his old life. To prove it, his lawyer hired a team of psychologists and neurologists to examine him for 10 days. They used every technique they could think of short of truth serum, and in their report, they claimed they couldn't find any indication that Fritz could remember being Larry, and they were sure he wasn't lying. They also couldn't find any neurotic or psychotic tendencies to explain the memory loss, so luckily for Fritz, in the eyes of scientists, he didn't know he was a bigamist or a fraudster, and because he didn't know, the courts decided they couldn't charge him with a crime. And they wouldn't need to either. It wasn't long after that he started to experience severe stomach pains, and he was rushed to the hospital where they found out that the cancer behind his eye had spread to his liver. And only a few days later, on September 16, 1966, Fritz, or Larry, died in Omaha's St. Joseph's Hospital at 39 years old. Incredibly, even after death, he remained 2 people. A memorial was held in Fritz in Omaha, and the next day his body was moved to Akron to be buried as Larry in the Bader family plot. An obituary in the local Akron newspaper read, "There is no tomorrow for the man who claims to not remember the past. All that remains is a mystery." And it is some mystery. At the time, Fritz's lawyer put the blame on his tumor. The argument was that the tumor on that part of his brain may have caused memory loss, his personality change, and may even be responsible for his erratic behavior the day he went missing. If his brain had been damaged in surgery, it wouldn't be able to repair itself, so Fritz would never have been able to remember being Larry. At the same time, some people have also speculated that Larry had a catastrophic injury on the boat. This might have wiped his memory, and then his brain could have constructed a new past to help him cope. This has been known to happen, and it's called a fugue state or a dissociative fugue. When trauma takes place, it's sometimes possible that everything that happened before the event and develop a new identity and history as a coping mechanism. With significant trauma and memory loss, the brain tries to find a way to understand what's happening. If you had a fantasy life that you wanted to live but weren't living, it might fill the void. And a dissociative fugue does sound like what happened to Larry. The only problem is that a fugue state wears off and the older memories return, especially when the person in the state is subjected to stimuli from their old life. Fritz had tried to resist anything that could remind him of that past because he claimed doctors told him that it might be psychologically harmful if he did. Even so, though, his old friends, family, and lawyers constantly tried to drag his old memories out. In August of 1965, Mary Lou and her kids even spent 2 days with Larry. The meeting was good-natured and he liked them, but they remained strangers no matter how hard he tried to remember them. Mary Lou, on the other hand, felt like he was almost trying to convince himself that he didn't recognize anyone. She hoped that one day either his memories would eventually return or he'd stop fighting them so hard. At the same time, other people would keep testing Fritz, asking him questions about the time before the boating accident, trying to tease out a memory from his past life, but the time the Navy and the submarine attack. Even still, fugue states can take years to reverse, and Larry or Fritz didn't have years. He died before there was a chance for his old memories to come back. Interestingly, some memories did linger from Larry to Fritz, though. For example, he retained his passion and talent for archery, and it's even been speculated that the real reason he called himself Fritz is that somewhere in there he remembered his old boss, the pencil-mustachioed Fritz Zeppt. Another theory pushed by psychologists at the time was that he was a modern-day schizophrenic, most likely meaning he suffered from what we now call a dissociative identity disorder. It might be that Fritz was another personality of Larry and took over when the boat accident happened. Maybe something did happen when he was in the Navy and was triggered by the storm at Lake Erie. When this was mixed with the stress at home, the debt, and how his life turned out, the personality of Fritz took over and never let go. This fits most of the facts, but people with dissociative disorders often have some idea that there are other personalities. Fritz spoke about Larry as if he was someone else, constantly referring to him as that other fellow, and even saying, "I am Fritz Johnson, and I have never heard of this Baderman until this matter come up." Even when Fritz talked about Larry, it wasn't like he was talking about another part of him. In his mind, Larry was literally another
Did you
person.
call him a beta?
But even if he did have a psychological break or injury, how do we explain the missing briefcase and the fuel line on the boat that had been disconnected? Maybe the trauma wasn't just surviving the storm. Maybe someone had spotted the roll of cash he had with him and decided to hijack his boat and take it from him, leaving him for dead. Of course, there was always another possibility. Larry could have simply been a brilliant liar. Psychological testing at the time was not what it is today. Larry could have just wanted to escape from his old life and debts, so he faked his death on a stormy night at Lake Erie and started over. Whether he walked away from that boat as Larry the liar or Fritz the flamboyant, his fuel line had been disconnected and his small suitcase and the wad of cash were missing. It seems like quite the coincidence, as does the idea of his tumor causing catastrophic memory loss just at that moment. There's also the question of what happened in the time between the storm and his appearance at the Round Table Bar. Somehow, he went from drowned fisherman to debonair bachelor in those few days, which is obviously a difficult thing to do if you're washing up on the shore, confused and helpless, but a much easier thing to do if you'd planned it from the start. The problem here is it doesn't explain why Fritz was so cooperative. Why would he volunteer for a fingerprint test? Why would he agree to look after both families with no pushback? All of Fritz's actions seem to suggest that he couldn't remember being Larry. Of course,
what Yamaha said. Post anesthetic amnesia happens too. Last one took me about a month. I was trying to talk about some reconstruction I had done and could not say the word hope. For example, it was very frustrating. Aww, that's crazy. It would be pretty easy back then to fake a death and start a new life. I think he might actually had amnesia though. I think he did too. That's my vibe, but I don't know. Ash, dang it! Where's Moose at? Moose, she's talking in code to me again, and I don't know what it means. Okay, hold on. Let's finish this, and then we'll start the next one.
of course, that also might have been a plot to stay out of jail. If Larry had planned the whole thing from the start, he could have also planned what to do if he were found out. So, what do you think? Was it all a hoax by Larry, or was Fritz the victim of a tragedy? Did he suffer a mental health breakdown due to a terrible storm, or by an attack by hijackers, or did he plan the whole thing to get away from a life he didn't want to live? Hello everyone, and welcome to Scary Interesting. I'm super excited to announce that the first ever Scary
Okay, so that was the first one. You guys, in the chat, if you think so if y'all think that he actually had like some type of amnesia, press 1. I'm just curious. Press 1 if you think there was some type of amnesia, and press 2 if you think that he faked it or he did it himself. I'm like super curious. And then I'll pull up the next one. There's Moose. Moose, she's talking to me in all these codes. Oh, is that what that one is? Oh, it's faces, huh? This one I could kind of tell. Oh, really? Okay, I'm putting my vote in. Dang, there's a few of you that really think he did it himself, huh? Interesting. Okay, there's my vote. I think he actually had some form of amnesia. So we got 3 for 2. We got me for 1. Interesting. Now you both are probably talking to each other in code. 1. It's just me and you, Sig. Hold on, Yamaha, what do you think, love? Governor, where are you, Governor? Governor Yamaha. My theory is he went out there to die, and the trauma actually killed off Larry, and he became Fritz. Interesting. Okay, hold on. I'm going to pull up the next one. They're talking in code to each other. You fuckers. How dare you? Oh. Okay, hold on. Let me get the next one up. Phyllis, where you at, Phyllis? Oh, Phyllis. I can't pull this one out. Did Phyllis fall asleep? I don't know. Maybe she did. She was in it for a hot minute, though. Oh, okay. I should have put that as an option. You're right, Fufa cat. Fofa Fufa? Fufa Fofa. Fafa Fufu? 5, your mom. No. No. 3. You guys are all shits. I'm just kidding. No, number 3 is Alien, though, for sure. That one makes sense. Fofa. Okay, got it. I got it. Thank you. Answer is actually 5. It's always your mom. So Ash is technically correct. I'll take the L on that one. The Tooth Fairy. Okay, so give me the thumbs up if you guys can hear. I'm gonna press play. I'm gonna make it bigger, and then press play so if you guys can hear. This is Bedtime Stories. I'll drop their link.
Beyond Earth into the public mainstream. Join us as we take a late night cruise. This week, we delve into Australia's most notorious encounter with what is known
Probiotic cultures? Probiotic cultures? Do it for baby Jesus. He's such a nut. Probins. What are you talking about, Governor? Late night cruise, right? Okay. Onward.
This week, we delve into Australia's most notorious encounter with what is known as the Shadow People, an encounter that would become a pivotal catalyst in propelling knowledge of life beyond Earth into the public mainstream. Join us as we take a late-night cruise with Kelly Cahill and her husband into the cold, lonely depths of missing time through the foothills of the southern Dandenong Mountains. It was like waking from some vague daydream. As she returned to her senses, focusing on the dark silhouettes of the trees as they rushed past outside the window, Kelly Cahill turned to her husband with an odd look of confusion upon her face. Andrew seemed focused upon the road ahead, before he finally turned to her with an equally haunted expression. Meekly, she asked him if she had fallen asleep, but he couldn't answer. He simply affected a tighter grip on the steering wheel and shook his head with uncertainty. It was obvious to both of them that they were experiencing the same sense of inner turmoil, though they could not understand what that turmoil was or why they felt it. Something had just happened, but for some reason, they had no recollection of it. There was an odd odor inside the vehicle, and she could feel a small irritation, like a minor burning sensation somewhere on her midriff. But it was this vague memory of the red lights that bothered her. She didn't know what the lights were or where she had seen them, just that there had been many, all gliding towards her. The car hit a pothole in the road, snatching her from her reverie. Stunned and disorientated, the couple continued their journey in silence, exhausted and longing for their beds, wanting only to alleviate whatever mysterious deeds had unsettled them. On the 8th of August 1993, Kelly and Andrew Cahill were driving home after attending a barbecue hosted by one of their friends. Although it was winter in Australia, it had not been particularly cold. The evening had brought with it a cool breeze and some pockets of light rain, but it had not been enough to dampen their spirits. They had sat chatting with their friends for many hours before finally heading home at around midnight. Their journey took them along Belgrave Hallam Road. Stretching over the long Dandenong Mountains of southern Australia, the pair made their way through the rolling countryside with ease, looking forward to retiring to their beds due to the lateness of the hour. However, at some point along their route, they spotted what Kelly described as a blimp rising out of the distance. Slowing down, they kept their eyes on this strange object as it drew closer and realized it was actually disc-shaped. Hovering at double the height of the treetops, it drew fast upon them, emitting a dazzling orange glow. The couple could not take their eyes off it as they peered at dark figures standing tall behind what appeared to be windows around the object's outer rim. Kelly had just enough time to point and tell Andrew to look at the people in the windows before it suddenly disappeared. Under the waning moon, the couple continued for another mile or so before noticing a blinding light in the middle distance. The closer they moved towards it, the more they realized it appeared to be a screen of pure white light draped across the landscape ahead of them. Kelly raised her hand to shield her eyes as they drove into it, unable to see anything beyond its radiance. The next thing she knew, the light had disappeared, but their car seemed to be much further along the road, and Kelly immediately wondered if she had blacked out. When the couple returned home, Kelly noticed a mysterious geometric marking below her navel. A red equilateral triangle, the sides of which were about 10 millimeters in length. Several layers of skin within this marking appeared to have been burned away. The couple also discovered that they returned home an hour and a half later than they should have done, meaning that there were 90 minutes of their journey they could not account for. Exhausted, they didn't think too much of it, but the next morning, Kelly in particular began to feel that something was off. Over the next few days, she commenced a long and heavy menstruation, even though her next cycle was not due for a while. This was accompanied by daily nauseating migraines, which she experienced on and off for about 6 weeks. Medical treatment was sought, and further tests were carried out, including sonograms, but nothing would yield an answer as to its cause. She was then hospitalized, and only after being placed on a strong course
How did I get yeeted? Who yeeted me? Wait. They did, Yamaha. They got me, arse. What just happened? Okay, hold on. How long have I been off? Like, has it been like a few minutes or just a minute or two? I need to know how far back to rewind. Okay. That was so weird. 90 minutes, shush. Don't even. It's only. I've only been on for 56 minutes. Someone's gonna come back in a week. Claim me to be friends. I'm like, I don't know where I went. That was so weird. You've been gone 90 minutes. Yeah, don't you go fucking with me now. I was all scared. Somebody got taken by Ash said, everyone please be patient. Somebody got taken by alien. She'll be right back. I like how you're telling everyone to remain calm. You're like, remain calm. Remain calm. She's only with aliens. She's fine. She's fine. She knows them. Clumsy has on an eye patch. Oh, I kind of have a thing for eye patches. I'll totally wear an eye patch. Arf, arf. Okay, guys, so hopefully, like, I'm on a decent spot. Okay, I'm gonna play it. Tell me if this sounds okay. Like, I rewound it about 3 minutes.
migraines, which she experienced on and off for about 6 weeks. Medical treatment was sought, and doctors were able to detect an infection in her womb. Further tests were carried out, including sonograms, but nothing would yield an answer as to its cause. She was then hospitalized, and only after being placed on a strong course of antibiotics did her symptoms begin to abate. As for her
is this okay, or should I
migraines,
rewind it more?
the doctors performed CAT scans looking for any signs of trauma, but again, nothing was detected. She was simply given painkillers and discharged. But in reality, the real horror of what took place was only...
Is this an okay spot, y'all? Or should I rewind more? Or go back further? I can say, why am I saying rewind? I'm such a 90s kid, huh? It's fine, don't rewind. Let's find out rewind. It's good? Okay. All right. You sure? You're not just saying that, right? Don't you go lying
It's
on
only
me
just
now.
beginning. Soon, a whole sequence of harrowing events would begin to unfold from her memory. Events so extraordinary that her accounts would leave UFO investigators and medical professionals arrested by their utter
I
perplexity
do
and
get
marvel.
migraines. Ofa.
What she would discover would forever leave an impression, not just upon her life, but also upon her skin and in the soil and grass where those memories were forged. On the night in question, after driving through the mysterious curtain of light, Kelly eventually recalled that they pulled off the road and parked next to a large open field. But what awaited them in that field, they could never have imagined. A colossal craft the size of a 3-story building and as wide as an Olympic swimming pool hovered in the air a short distance away. The two of them stepped out of their vehicle, and it quickly became apparent that Kelly and Andrew were not the only ones who had stopped to observe the strange object. 2 other cars had pulled up about 100 or so meters away. A man and 2 women in the closest of these vehicles, and another man traveling alone in the one furthest away. Exhilarated by this rare opportunity to witness something so extraordinary, Kelly and the others looked on in amazement. But then, a tall dark figure appeared beneath the craft, with a large group of other dark figures standing behind it. Slowly, Kelly's enthusiasm soured into a brooding uncertainty which pooled in the pit of her stomach. She stated that this sensation was like low-frequency waves, so dense and profound that it became an arresting physical weight upon her. Spellbound, she lost control of her senses and suddenly went mad with absolute terror. She desperately tried to free herself from what she described as an
That is
almost
so
hypnotic
creepy.
trance.
That would scare the crap out
But
of me.
no matter how much she
Right?
fought to
No,
secure
thank
her own
you.
sanity, there was nothing she could do. The
Gosh.
figures, who possessed bright red eyes which were disproportionately large in relation to their heads, then split up and headed towards each separate gathering of people, affecting the appearance of demons gliding across the field towards them. One group charged after Cahill and her husband. Another sped after the party further down the road. An electric blow then struck Kelly at her solar plexus, knocking the wind out of her lungs and sending her flying onto her back. Struggling for breath, she attempted again and again to sit up, convinced she was about to die. Suddenly, Kelly was unable to see. There was nothing but darkness as she was overcome by an intense nausea. She sat up, screaming for Andrew, and a hand was then placed upon her shoulder. She recalls one of the figures speaking in plain English.
Do something about it.
Nearby, she could hear Andrew demanding to be released. Let us go, you bastards.
We mean you no harm.
If you didn't mean us any harm, then why did you hit my wife? Completely terrified, she vomited. She then felt someone examining her. The next moment, she and her husband were back in their car, driving on Belgrave Hallam Road in silence. Kelly would later seek the assistance of UFO researchers who would conduct the most thorough UFO investigation in Australia's history at that time. Cahill's case would be pivotal in bringing this subject into the public eye. For 18 months solid, the location of the incident was intensely probed. Researchers divided several acres of the field into 1-meter blocks with pegs and tape. Samples were taken from the ground. Aerial surveys were carried out using infrared photography, and magnetic readings were logged by a portable magnetometer. What was found would only prompt more questions regarding the significance of the markings discovered on some of the victims. The ground scans uncovered a large, 20-meter triangular shape in the field. Initially, it was thought to be an impression, but this turned out not to be the case. A carcinogen known as pyrene was instead discovered, which is a chemical found in coal mines, even though no coal mines were located anywhere near the field. Whatever the triangle signified, for 5 months following the event, Kelly would be visited 4 more times by one of the frightening beings she had witnessed, who would stand at her bedside in a cloak and hood. She described these visitations in a strange way. The experience would start as a dream, in which she wasn't able to see the entity, but could feel it in other ways. She felt as if she was being pulled by a nearby presence, which spoke to her and told her not to panic. But despite its assurances, she felt the same profound horror she had experienced on the field. It was only when she awoke that she would see the entity briefly standing over her before it disappeared right before her eyes. Aside from these odd visitations, she and Andrew would have countless bizarre electrical disturbances in their home. Kelly related how appliances and lights would turn on by themselves, and that she would receive static shocks through things which were not otherwise conductive, such as soil, wood, and rocks. The most incredible of these anomalies occurred when the engine of her car started of its own accord, despite the vehicle having still been locked and the kill switch activated. Psychologically, the whole incident had a tremendous effect on Cahill's husband. For many years, he would not divulge his recollection of it, until reluctantly, he admitted to Kelly that not only did he remember his experience, but also that he'd had several UFO encounters prior to it. Unbeknown to the Cahills, the other people who had stopped to observe the strange object that night had also reported their experiences to researchers. Kelly Cahill had never met any of the occupants of the other vehicles, either before or after the event, and yet the similarity between each of the accounts is astonishing. On the night in question, the vehicle closest to them, parked about 100 meters away, was driven by a man named Bill. He was accompanied by his wife, Glenda, and a family friend named Jane. Another car was parked a further 30 meters beyond theirs, and this was occupied by a government law department employee named Dave. All of them, apart from Andrew, would produce illustrations of what they had seen. Neither group was made aware of each other's drawings until much later, and the uncanny resemblance between them would only further reinforce the reality and nature of the event. All depicted a circular craft lined with many windows and unnaturally dark figures standing between 6 and 7 feet tall, backlit by a bright white beam being emitted from above. Of the 6 witnesses, Kelly, Glenda, Jane, and Dave each discovered a triangular burn mark on their body, located just below the navel. Andrew and Bill, however, had no such wound. The 2 other women had also suffered gynecological problems similar to Kelly's in the immediate aftermath, and Glenda in particular would recall waking up in a strange room, strapped to a table, and being examined by a tall entity dressed in a dark cloak. This sounds eerily similar to the creature described in Kelly's subsequent visitation experiences. The only difference in the accounts is that Bill, Glenda, Jane, and Dave all reported hearing a humming sound from the craft and blacked out immediately after crossing the road to see what was in the field. Although they saw the figures, they don't recall them having bright red eyes as Kelly described. On the other hand, the Cahills didn't hear any humming and seemed to have remained conscious for a while longer than the other 4 witnesses. Kelly would go on to say that the eyes of the figures glowed red only after they began to glide towards them. Finally, the accounts of all 6 witnesses were backed up by reports from residents in the area, saying that they had seen a strange object in the skies at around the same time that the event occurred. We have covered several abduction experiences in previous episodes, and whilst those accounts are both harrowing and intriguing in their own ways, in nearly every single case, there is almost always only one witness. The fact that in this instance, there are multiple witnesses who are previously unfamiliar with each other, all reporting the same thing, lends a high degree of credence to their stories. And the fact that the studies of the ground on which the event took place yielded strange results, somewhat corroborating their accounts, should leave even the most ardent of skeptics wondering, what if? What was it that the Cahills and the others present experienced? Was it really an alien abduction, or could it have been a shared hallucination between all 6 witnesses? If so, what would have caused it? And why did residents across the region also report seeing a vivid orange light in the sky? Perhaps it was more spiritual in nature. Could they all have been spirited away, or even undergone a collective near-death experience? Kelly and Andrew certainly seem to lean towards this possibility, at least at first. Having both come from deeply religious upbringings, their initial impressions of the beings who seized upon them were that they were entirely demonic in nature. For many people, the triangular abrasions discovered on their bodies go some way to supporting this assertion. As with the Buffalo Ranch in Colorado, where many otherworldly occurrences took place, some commentators believe that the painting of an equilateral triangle upon the carcasses of the mutilated cows was a way of mocking the Holy Trinity. It's also interesting that all 6 witnesses described the entities as featureless black shadows, much like the shadow people seen in many haunting experiences. Red-eyed shadow people, as they were described by Kelly herself, have been witnessed all over the world and are viewed by many cultures as demonic, carrying with them sinister agendas. Regardless of what the circumstances may be surrounding the events that took place in the Dandenong Mountains, it was certainly enough to have caused great distress in 6 different people all at once, to the point where it changed their lives forever. They would never be the same again. We only hope that Kelly, Andrew, Bill, Glenda, Jane, and David managed to come to terms with what happened and eventually found peace and solace in the face of such a terrifying experience. Until next time.
Well, that one was entertaining. The first one was my favorite, though. We came across light years in time and space to tap that fanny. Look, Phyllis is here! Yay! Phyllis, did you nod off? Did you? Were you on the nod? Were you taking a nod or a nappy? Yeah, I said a Nightbot. Maybe she was taking a nappy. She might have been tie-tie. Take that, Nightbot. Oh, burn, sizzle. Just a bunch of horn dogs. They got Melissa J. No, they got Mel. Arf, 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 Mel. Arf, arf. Come back. We gotta get her. We have to protect her. Oh, probe job. I really like that. probe job. Oh, yikers. Aw, Phyllis nodded. Taking a nod sounds British. I think it is British, probably. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say it might be British. I'm start getting ready. Okay. Start getting ready. Oh, well, I was gonna end it. Should I do something you want me to bark or no? Just kidding. Maybe I'll read it. I'll read a book, but I don't sound cool like Yamaha. Yamaha's got a good voice for reading and stuff, for telling stories. He's got that cool governor type voice. All right, y'all. So that was it for tonight's chill stream. Thank you for hanging with me. I appreciate it. Woohoo! I finally wore Phyllis out. She's a beast. Phyllis, you finally wore him out, eh? Is there more? My moss? Love you moss? You love me more? Oh, okay. We were talking about fat arses. I wasn't for sure. Okay, Brazy, why'd you come in so late, Kay Brazy? You're usually right on time. Were you out on a hot date? I hope so. Another way around. Oh, okay. Udo Moss, one more. Okay, hold on. There might be one more to watch. You want me to see? One more. Oh, hold on. I'm getting like the more. Let me see. I'll look. I thought that was it, but I'll check. I'll at least check. Hold, please. If you're going to twist me arm about it. Okay, I found another one. This one is not probes. Oh, please. Okay, I found it. I found one more. It's this one's gonna be Lazy's. Lazy Masquerade. I'll go ahead and throw his link in there now. Hold on. It's kind of long though. It's kind of long. That's what she said. Whoop. Just kidding. Okay, hold on. Let me share screen. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can see and hear, okay?
Take a quick moment to open up Google and search your own name. Before we get started today, take a quick moment to open up Google and search your own name.
Can you it's here and see? Okay,
I did this not too long ago and found that a worrying amount of my personal information was freely available. I'm talking my personal email, my phone number, even my home address. That completely freaked me out and was something I wanted to sort out quick, which is why I'm happy to introduce today's sponsor,
Play it by
Aura.
ear.
As it turns out, data brokers were making a fortune selling my information to robocallers,
They were?
spammers,
Okay,
and
hold on.
scammers. And if you're not protected, they're probably doing. Simply go to aura.com/lazy,
Thanks, Lazy.
or click the link in my
Bomb.
description, or scan the QR code on screen, and let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online.
Lazy's cool dude. Like he's my BFF. I'm like, he's a cool, rad dude, everyone.
Let me start by saying that this first case is a difficult listen. If at any point you feel like you want to skip to the next entry, I totally understand. You can find the timestamps on the progress bar below.
I don't give trigger warnings.
The Countess
so
of
trigger,
Chester,
non-trigger
the main
warnings.
NHS hospital
Oh, no,
for the city
no,
of, well,
Secret?
Chester,
Are we safe? I don't know.
located
That's a
in
good
Cheshire,
question.
England. And one with a good reputation too. That is, until recently. Starting in 2012, a new employee began working at the facility. Lucy Letby, a nurse in her mid-20s. According to those that knew her best, she loved cats, salsa dancing, and cocktails. But more than any of that, she had a much darker hobby that she enjoyed indulging in. One that she kept to herself. One so depraved, it defies understanding, at least by rational, sane minds. Having been assigned to the neonatal ward, Lucy's job involved caring for the most vulnerable members of society and helping to bring new life into the world. But in reality, she took greater pleasure in doing the opposite. This is the story of Lucy Letby, a monster disguised as a nurse. It was the 4th of August, 2015, when the mother of Child E left her newborn son's side to get him some milk. Minutes later, she returned to the neonatal ward and was met by the sound of crying coming from one of the nursing rooms. Her son was just 5 days old, and since he'd been born 7 weeks early and only weighed 3 pounds, she of course rushed to check if he was in distress. To this mother's horror, she entered her son's room and realized that not only was he the baby that was crying, but also that he had blood around his mouth. Beside him was nurse Lucy Letby, who, in said mother's words, was pretending to look busy, fiddling about, but not actually helping. Doctors soon arrived and did their best to save the young patient, but alas, they were unable to do so. His COD was determined to be a bowel condition. Since the incident wasn't considered suspicious, no post-mortem was conducted. Despite taking care of some of the county's most unwell babies, the Countess of Cheshire's neonatal unit saw only 2 to 3 deaths each year. However, Child E's death had been the 4th to occur in 2015 alone. And by that point, it was only August. They had almost lost another young patient in June too, Child B, who needed to be resuscitated after suddenly becoming very unwell. The day after Child D passed, his twin brother, Child F, also became extremely sick and almost lost his life. On the surface, it appeared as if each of these 6 incidents didn't share anything in common. Lucy Letby had been on duty on each occasion. After all, Lucy was a smiley, well-liked, diligent
Didn't this
nurse
lady
who
get
got along with all of her colleagues
arrested recently,
and whose
y'all?
kind
I think
bedside
I
manner
might have
made her
heard
one of the
something.
most popular members of staff.
She's horrible.
But when a 5th baby passed during one of Lucy's shifts in October that same year,
Yeah, what?
a few eyebrows
Oh,
started to
okay.
raise. Not only have 5 lives now
Yay, Beautiful's here. Hi, Beautiful. Welcome. Welcome. Good to see you. Arr, arr. They talked me into another one, so yeah, she is evil. I think I've heard about her recently. Okay, onward.
lives now been lost, but a further 5 had almost perished during that same period. many of them developing lifelong conditions such as blindness and learning
As I said,
disabilities.
this case makes me so furious. The
Again,
doctors called
the
her
only thing
out.
linking all of these
The
occurrences
covered
was
floor.
Lucy Letby's
Ooh,
presence on the
yikes.
ward, and
I
the
know
fact
all that.
that they
I
all
couldn't go on
deteriorated
record.
rapidly after being handed over to her. One of Lucy's colleagues, a man named Dr. Stephen Breary, found this to be particularly suspicious and wrote to the neonatal unit manager, asking them to investigate whether she had had any involvement in their deaths. They wrote back to Dr. Breary, saying that they believed Lucy wasn't involved, and that her presence on the unit during each of these incidents was nothing more than an unfortunate coincidence. No further action was taken. Not at that point, at least. In 2016, another of Lucy's co-workers became extremely concerned when he walked in on her watching a baby that had stopped breathing and wasn't taking action. This young patient thankfully survived, though others wouldn't be so lucky. When this consultant raised his concerns to senior management, he was told to stop making a fuss. All of these passings had been natural, they claimed.
Yikes, this is really
One of the babies had a
bad.
damaged heart, another had pneumonia. Nurse Letby wasn't involved. Between March and June of 2016, a further 3 newborns would almost lose their lives while under Lucy's supervision. By the end of June, disaster struck again, the same day Lucy returned to work after holidaying in Ibiza. She'd been left to take care of 3 very healthy newborn triplets. But strangely, 2 of them would unexpectedly fall ill within 24 hours of each other. Neither of them would make it. Understandably, more and more consultants at the Countess of Chester began sharing their concerns about Lucy. What some had previously brushed off as a terrible coincidence had now become cause for alarm.
I'm so sad for those parents.
They all began racking their brains, trying to determine the cause of the sudden upswing in infant mortality. But it was obvious that someone was deliberately taking their lives, and the only common denominator was Nurse Letby. After the second triplet passed, an emergency meeting was called. The staff members that had been taking care of the triplets were visibly distraught. All of them, that is, except for Lucy, who, according to Dr. Breary, seemed enthusiastic about coming into work the next day, despite being offered some time off to mentally recover. After the meeting, Dr. Breary called a senior manager at the Countess of Chester and flat out told her to suspend Lucy, to do whatever needed to be done to make sure that she wouldn't come back to work that following day. That senior manager refused. Dr. Breary then asked if she would take responsibility if anything happened to another baby that next day. The manager said yes, and ended the phone call. And guess what happened that following day? Another newborn almost lost their life on Lucy's watch.
No.
Finally, she was removed from the neonatal unit and
Gosh.
moved to administrative duties.
Holy shit.
Immediately, the unexplained deaths
Horrible.
stopped. But there was still no formal investigation into the suspicious loss of life. Numerous consultants asked for senior management to get the authorities involved. Management replied via email, saying, quote, "Action is being taken. All emails cease forthwith." They didn't contact law enforcement. It was strikingly clear that the executives at the Countess of Chester were trying to find a way out of this situation without getting the police involved, and were almost certainly protecting Lucy in order to save their own reputations. In fact, they even upheld a grievance brought against the consultants by Lucy herself, and ordered Dr. Breary and others to apologize to her for their baseless accusations. But despite being forced to send this email or lose their jobs, they refused to let Lucy get away with her actions, especially since she was due to return to her nursing role in May 2017. They took matters to Cheshire Police that same month, and finally, an investigation into the slayings began. One named Operation Hummingbird. Following the year-long investigation, some chilling lab results came to light. At least 2 of the victims had high levels of insulin and low levels of C-peptide, indicating that their bodies hadn't produced the insulin naturally, and that someone had administered a lethal dose of the substance into them. According to professionals, this couldn't have happened accidentally. In most of the other cases, the newborns had been injected with air. Had these lab results not been missed at the time, at least several of the patients could have been saved. As the investigation continued, detectives came to the same conclusion as the consultants: that Lucy Letby was a serial slayer. As can be seen by this attendance sheet, it wouldn't have been suspicious if she had been present for some of the incidents. Almost all of the nurses were. But Nurse Letby had been present on each of the 25 suspicious occasions that a young patient either collapsed or passed between mid-2015 and mid-2016. All the while, she'd been sending text messages to colleagues in an attempt to mask her involvement, and had even sent a sympathy card to the parents of one victim, telling them that they were in her thoughts and expressing her sorrow for their loss.
You bitch. Oh,
In 2018,
no, she did
Lucy was
not.
arrested in connection with all of the slayings. Her home was thoroughly searched.
Sorry, dropping B words.
Investigators found a diary which contained a bizarre note, one in which she had written contradictory statements. One line read, "I haven't done anything wrong," and others, "I killed them on purpose. I'm evil. I did this." Her past search history also revealed that she had been looking up information about the parents of her slain patients.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we'd all just noticed as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Despite this evidence, she wouldn't be charged until November 2020. And so it was that the residents of Chester discovered that their local hospital had been infiltrated by a serial slayer, one who preyed on their youngest and most vulnerable. Lucy Letby's trial began in October of 2022, but was finally resolved just last week on the 18th of August, 2023. Lucy was found guilty of taking the lives of 7 infants and of attempting to end those of 6 others between June 2015 and June 2016. Although the jury was only asked to consider 7 counts of murder, there were actually 13 premature passings on Lucy Letby's ward during that 12-month period, 5 times the usual rate. Lucy was on duty for all of them. The authorities continue to look into those cases. In yet another act of cowardice, Lucy Letby refused to attend her sentencing, which occurred on August 21st. In her absence, the judge announced that Lucy Letby, currently 33 years old, will serve the rest of her life behind bars,
to go to her own
with
sentencing.
no potential for parole.
She have
Because the
to
seriousness of
country,
your
never mind.
offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not
Mr.
apply.
Malloy, welcome, sir.
The order of the court, therefore, is a whole life order on each and every offence.
I heard that
You
that's
will
rare
spend
for
the
them
rest
to
of
give
your
somebody
life
though in the UK. Like normally, like a life sentence, I think it's 20.
During the entire
25
trial,
years.
the senior management at the Countess of Chester were heavily criticised for failing to act on the consultant's concerns. Plenty of lives could have been saved had only Dr. Breary and others been taken seriously.
No, it's not a
In fact,
claim, Mr. Malloy.
had these
this is brand new.
consultants not persisted, then this whole case would have likely been
It's
swept
live,
under the rug,
Mr. Malloy, you dork.
and Lucy Letby's despicable actions would have gone unreported and unpunished. The Countess of Chester is now under new management. Unfortunately, this is far from the first case of its kind. Harold Shipman, Niels Hogel, Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Many medical practitioners have covertly taken lives at their own discretion, with most cherishing the power that their position gave them. Namely, the power to choose who lives and who dies. It remains to be seen whether that sense of power is what drove Lucy too. In all likelihood, we'll probably never know why she committed her heinous acts. But unlike most of her twisted predecessors, Lucy didn't fit the typical profile of a medical killer. She was social, well-liked, and otherwise well-adjusted. She didn't act, or indeed look, like the type of person who would commit such despicable horrors. But the fun friend, good daughter, and kind colleague that others saw her as were just facades. Faces that she wore to fool even those who knew her best. Because beneath that veneer of normality, she knew who she really was. A wolf in sheep's clothing.
For
A
sure.
cold-hearted monster. And one that could have and should have been stopped sooner.
Okay, so that was the first story. Oh my gosh, that gave me chills all over. So I had heard about this lady, but I didn't know like how like the details. It's horrible. All right, so we're moving on to the next one.
Next, we need to head back more than half a century to the state of Texas.
Good old Texas.
The date was August 23rd, 1971, and a young mother had just moved to Fort Worth.
Yes, he's the one with the England accent.
Alta
Not I.
Apentenko had separated from her husband, Jeffrey Highsmith, and brought their young daughter, Melissa, with her. Melissa was less than 2 years old at the time, 21 months to be exact, and to support her young daughter, Alta had gotten a job at a diner. However, there was one problem. She needed to find someone to watch Melissa during her shifts. Alta placed an advert in the local paper, stating that she was looking for someone to watch over her daughter at her home. It wasn't long before she was contacted by a woman, one who identified herself as Ruth Johnson. Over the phone, Ruth agreed to meet Alta at her place of work and interview for the position. Thing is, the prospective childminder never showed up. Instead, she contacted Alta again, and explaining how she wanted the job and how well suited she was for it. She also mentioned that she had a large back garden of her own, where she cared for many other children throughout the week. Could she perhaps watch Melissa there instead? Well, that all sounded ideal, and so Alta agreed to hire Ruth based on their phone conversations alone. That same morning, Alta left Melissa at home with her roommate and went to work, the arrangement being that Ruth would pick Melissa up from there and then return her in the early evening. Ruth showed up to the apartment as arranged and took Melissa. Nothing seemed to be amiss. That is, until she failed to reappear with the toddler at the arranged time. It soon dawned on Alta that she hadn't entrusted her daughter into the care of a professional childminder. She had handed her over to a kidnapper. Alta contacted law enforcement immediately, and a search for the mysterious babysitter and the young child was soon underway. But despite a lot of local publicity and coverage, not a single plausible lead seemed to turn up in the immediate aftermath. Alta's roommate, the only person who had seen and spoken to Ruth in person, described her as looking and acting like an ordinary woman. That is, apart from one thing. This Ruth Johnson was wearing a pair of white gloves on a hot August day in Texas. As seems to be common in cases like this, a lot of suspicion was leveled at Melissa's mother, Alta. People began theorizing that she was the one behind her daughter's disappearance, and that she had done something terrible to her. She had not long been separated from her husband, and had recently moved away. Could this have been some sort of despicable act of revenge? A way for Alta to get back at her husband? After all, what mother would trust a stranger to take care of their daughter? And not just a stranger, but one who had already acted suspiciously by not turning up to a scheduled meeting. Still, no charges were ever brought against Alta herself. As the decades rolled on, the whereabouts of Ruth Johnson and the well-being of Melissa, although the case went cold and the leads went from few to none, Melissa's parents never stopped looking for their daughter. They did interviews with newspapers and television shows. Time passed, and with new technologies came new avenues to spread Melissa's story. They eventually appeared on podcasts, talking about the case and getting the word out. They always remembered Melissa on her birthday, celebrating it as if she was still with them. When there was a reported sighting of her in South Carolina, her family members made the 1,000-mile journey to investigate it for themselves. It ended up being mortal soap, but it showed that Melissa's loved ones never gave up on finding her. But with each passing year, the odds of Melissa and her parents being reunited only seemed to get smaller and smaller. For law enforcement, no solid leads emerged. But that was all to change in 2022, more than 50 years after Melissa had been taken, when her now elderly father, Jeffrey, began a new project. making his family tree. After signing up on 23andMe, Jeffrey sent off a sample of his DNA in late 2022, simply hoping to find some family connections. The results that came back were strange. It seemed there were already matches in the database for 3 unknown individuals, and based on their strong genetic similarities, these people could only be his grandchildren, which of course to Jeffrey made no sense. His only child had been stolen from him 5 decades prior. It couldn't be. Could it? After doing some research, Jeffrey learned that the mother of his supposed grandchildren was a woman in her 50s. One Melanie Walden. To his surprise, she lived less than a 20-minute drive from Fort Worth. Jeffrey reached out to Melanie via email and convinced her to take a DNA test. And once her sample had been analysed and compared to Jeffrey's, there was no longer any doubt. Melanie Walden was in fact Melissa Highsmith, and for the majority of her life, she had been living a mere stone's throw from the family she had been taken from. The revelation that Melissa, or Melanie, was still alive sent shockwaves throughout the local community. Melissa had been raised by a surrogate family, whom she had always believed were her real, biological parents. She immediately confronted her mother, or should I say, the woman who raised her, and asked her for the truth. The mother admitted that Melanie was indeed Melissa, and said that she had bought her from a woman for $500 back in 1972. It's never been made clear how true this mother's story is. While she claims to have bought Melissa, there's no definitive proof that she wasn't the childminder who had taken her in the first place. Ruth Johnson. Regardless, due to the statute of limitations having expired in this case, no charges will be brought against her or anyone else. Although Melissa hasn't spoken a great deal about her upbringing, it seems it wasn't a happy one. She ended up running away at the age of 15, and has alluded to doing, quote, what she had to do to get by. In 2023, 51 years after she had been stolen, Melissa was finally reunited with her birth parents. It was an emotional reunion to say the least. While on the surface, this is a happy story of a family being reunited, there are plenty of complications. For Alta, she's been vindicated from the accusations that have swirled around her since her daughter went missing, but has missed out on almost all of her life. And for Jeffrey, he's been reunited with his daughter, but one that has no memories of him at all. And for Melissa, or Melanie, she has had her entire life story flipped on its head.
Probably on the nod again.
It's hard to imagine how she must be feeling.
I mean, woof, arf.
Because she was taken so young, she and her biological parents have no shared memories. They have no experiences they went through together, no family events or life landmarks that they celebrated or commiserated through. No milestones reached from childhood and beyond that they can reminisce about. On the other hand, the woman who raised her, the woman she's been calling Mum her entire life, had either stolen her or bought her and kept her true identity a secret for 5 decades. Happily for Melissa's part, she seems to be seeing the best of the situation. She plans to change her name back to Melissa, and is even looking to renew her vows with her husband so that her birth parents have the opportunity to see her get married. I just hope that they can enjoy whatever time they have to get to know each other, and aren't plagued with the thoughts of how their lives may have been different had Melissa never been taken.
Okay, I think there's one more, and it's Mum, like M-U, like Mum, like a mum flower. I have a mum flower tattooed on my right arm. It's M-U-M, Mum. What are you talking about, Maddie, you butt?
With a current population of just over 500,000 people, Tasmania is by far the least populated state in the land down under. One of the few people to call its remote shores home was 61-year-old New Norfolker Dale Nicholson. On the afternoon of December 10th, 2016, Dale had spoken with a friend on the phone. They talked casually about their plans, with Dale mentioning that he was going fishing. After that conversation, he was never heard from again. The last confirmed in-person sighting of him was by his neighbor that same day, who saw Dale getting into his car, carrying his fishing rods. When he didn't return home that evening, his family reported him missing. A search conducted by the local authorities turned up no clues. It was as if Dale had been swallowed up by the earth. His loved ones were extremely worried about his well-being. They knew that Dale battled with dark thoughts, and often found solace in drink and heavier substances. Despite a thorough search and rescue effort, no trace of Dale was found anywhere. His family continued to search for him in the years that followed. In 2021, though, Dale was declared legally dead, even though his body remained unaccounted for. Since Dale was an avid fisherman who had last been seen with his rods, his case caught the attention of the diving community. Search and rescue diving is a rare discipline that requires an immense amount of skill and mental fortitude. And that's not just because of the dangerous nature of the work. You see, the job typically entails divers locating and retrieving human remains. But beyond those who do it as a paid career, there are a growing number of divers who have started working with the families of missing people. Families who fear that their loved ones have ended up in the water somewhere and feel like the authorities are incapable of finding them. There are various YouTube channels created by divers who explore lakes and rivers, and it's genuinely astounding how many missing people they find hidden in bodies of water that thousands of people pass by every day. The divers who take on these types of cases typically offer their services for free. They're not looking for monetary gain. They just want to help the families left behind and give them closure. YouTuber Down Under Dan Diving is one such man, and alongside his American colleague Bill McIntosh, he travelled to Tasmania, where Dale Nicholson had last been seen. In January of this year, the pair were actually searching for another missing person named Nicola Salas, focusing their search along the River Derwent, when they realised they may have stumbled upon another man, one who had disappeared 6 years earlier. The pair drove to various parts of the River Derwent where Dale's car could have feasibly gone into the water. After dismissing some locations due to lack of access, they took to their boat, and, using their underwater sonar equipment, got a reading on an object, one that was the size and shape of a car. Based on the dimensions, location, and water depth, the two men felt it merited an in-person investigation. The submerged, blue Ford Fairmont was located just behind the new Norfolk swimming pool, and only a few minutes' drive from Dale's house, literally around the corner according to a family member. On their first dive, the Down Under search and rescue team managed to read the car's license plate. This confirmed their suspicion. They had indeed found Dale Nicholson's car. And what's more, they noticed something in the front seat of the vehicle. Human remains. Without disturbing the scene any further, they took their information to the local authorities. Oftentimes in cases like this, the authorities are less than appreciative when amateurs get involved. There are a plethora of diving videos on YouTube where the police react with hostility whenever their investigation's been solved for them. Presumably because in their minds, such YouTubers show them up and make them look bad. Some of these YouTube divers have even been arrested for their good deeds. Thankfully, for the Down Under Dan YouTube channel, now known as Down Under Search and Rescue, that wasn't the case with this one, with both Dan and Bill agreeing that the Tasmanian police acted professionally and quickly after they had approached them. Law enforcement removed a series of bollards that had been erected since Dale had gone missing, and gained access to the water's edge to retrieve the vehicle. And so it was that 6 years after he had gone missing, Dale had finally been found. Not by the authorities, mind you, but by two good Samaritans. Not because they had any personal connection to Dale, not because they were being paid to find him, but just because they wanted to give some closure to his family and let Dale himself rest in peace. The amazing thing is that the family have been walking this path along the river, said diver Bill McIntosh. They've walked this path 1,000 times. Everyone in town walks by this location, and just never knew. Dale's family, understandably, had mixed emotions about the discovery. They were of course happy that they could now have some sense of closure, but deep down, they also harbored some quiet belief that Dale was still alive. They'll likely never know whether Dale drove into the water accidentally or intentionally, but at least now their loved one has finally been laid to rest. And for these divers, that's payment enough. A huge thank you to all of my supporters.
All right, y'all. That was the last one. That was from Lazy Masquerade. I did just drop his link again if y'all want to step up to him. He does good stuff as well. We've been on quite a while. That was good, though. The very first one, I think, is still my favorite. What was y'all's favorite? Tell me. Tell me now. A forever hold your peace. Elizabeth, thank you for chilling. Fofa, thank you for chilling. Yamaha, Malloy. Malloy, are you going live after this or no? Let me know. That way I can direct everyone to you if you are. Oh, there we go. Cool. Whoop, whoop. Thank you. Thank you, Maddie. I appreciate you. Thanks for streaming. You're welcome. I know you came in a little late. Peaches for the win. Clap, 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 baby. Clap, 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 clap. Arf, arf, arf. Clap, clap, clap. Okay, y'all. I will see you over there. Whoop, whoop.